Hello, good afternoon. Welcome to the Colorado Water Congress Summer Conference. I hope everyone enjoyed our lunch speaker, David. I thought we have a volunteer in here and did an awesome job. Welcome to our theater sessions. This session is on legislation and financing. So I think that was supposed to be a surprise. Hopefully it was. The reason that we are doing these sessions in this way, in 2015, we conducted a survey of our members, and from that survey, we learned two things. One thing that we learned is that our members want to feel like they are a part of the organization. And the second thing we learned is that they want us to show them, you want us to show you how we're protecting your interests. Oops, there that is. So between 2015 and now, we've developed a strategic plan that has 5 areas. Each area now has a committee of the Colorado Water Congress that is made up of our members of our board. Those committees are policy development, education and networking, finance, governance, and communications. Out of these 5 committees, the one that we are concentrating most heavily on and working on is the Communications Committee. So about a month ago, we conducted another member survey to find out, what type of communication are you all expecting to see from us, and how do you like to be communicated to? We learned from this survey that the frequency of our communication is great. A lot of things are great here. Detail in communication is great. Our platforms, which include where you're at right now, our conferences and events, our emails, our e-news, and then our members seem to not love Facebook and Twitter as much, and I totally feel you on that. So out of all of these platforms, our next step after this survey that we conducted is to really prioritize what we're communicating as far as content. This survey told us so many different priorities that you all are interested in, that it was, we really need to prioritize maybe like 4 or 5 types of things that we're communicating. So our next steps are to listen to you all in these sessions to really see what it is that you're passionate about hearing. And so during these sessions, we really want you all to participate. We're going to have Diana and Dick talk with you about legislation and really kind of hear what it is that you want to know about legislation. After this conference, our board will prioritize the key issues that come out of this session and the following session. And then what we learn will incorporate those key issues into our communications plan that we will start developing pretty much now. So the way this is going to work, there are 3 rooms. This big ballroom has been divided, so you're in Corbell 3, you have Corbell 2, and then 1. You'll hear 4 different issues today in this room. So you'll hear 2 now, I believe until 3 o'clock, 3:15, and then you'll hear 2 more later this afternoon. There will be 2 to 3 speakers per issue. And don't worry, this is not your last time to participate. We're recording these, and we will reach back out to you so you can have more input on how we focus on these topics. Oops, sorry, again, I didn't advance. So the way it's gonna work is that you will have information presented to you. We'll discuss, is there a communications problem with this issue? Is there something that the Water Congress should be doing that we're not currently doing? Is the Water Congress the correct entity to address this issue? And then this won't be your last opportunity to talk with us about it. So at this time, I will invite Diana Orff and Dick Brown up onto the stage. And do you want to, maybe they might walk around the room. The whole idea is to communicate with you and for you all to participate. Let's see.
Great. Can you hear me? Am I recording? I'm Diana Orff. I lobby for the Water Congress, and obviously for at least 4 to 5 months a year, we spend a lot of time with legislation. You, the members, have said that you want to have communication on legislation. As you know, that tends to occur very, very rapidly within the 120-day session. So for the Water Congress to focus on issues and get that information to you is a challenge, to say the least. But what I would like to hear, and I think what we would like to have our board know, is what specifically would you like to have information about? What are your priorities for learning about legislation, and what are the most critical things to get out to you quickly? So can I see some kind of indication of who has a top priority? Legislatively, what's one of the... Oh, okay. I'll get back to you in just a second. I'm getting ahead of myself. We have a lot of information that's out there, and I would like to know, maybe by a show of hands initially, how many of you access some of this information or know where to find it. We do have a state issues advocacy page on the web. We have a bill status sheet that shows you on a weekly basis where legislation is. We have bill summaries that are updated on a weekly basis. So this will include all the new bills, the bills that have been introduced during the session, and then amendments that are added to those bills. And this is what it looks like. How many of you have actually seen that on the website? Oh, good. We've got maybe 2/3 of the room. That's great. And there's the status sheet. How many of you check this on a weekly basis? Maybe 1/4 of the room. Okay. So if you have any questions about where a bill is in the process, this is a good place to check. Certainly, we're always willing to answer your questions, but go to this first as a resource. You want to know who's on the committee? Here they are in living color. These are great photographs. They are, they really are. They're professionally done, and give you an idea of who's on the committee. And if you check the state website, you'll find a little more information about those individuals and what their background is. There's the House and the Senate. So this is a great resource. These things are already available to you. So it would be repetitive for us to try to reinvent the wheel and come up with additional information. But we did have a gentleman back here with a comment.
No, what my point was going to be is that I think one of the values of the legislative stuff is the state affairs when you're in session is getting that information as quickly as we can. I think we all get some calls from our constituents asking what's the status, where are you at with that bill. And I think one of the important things for Water Congress is to keep that as updated as possible. And I think after we've talked about it, I think after the state affairs meets, having some sort of update to the membership.
Great, and I will pat Emily on the back, because as soon as the State Affairs Committee meetings are over, she summarizes those meetings. So it's very helpful to know exactly what we agreed to and what we discussed. Those meetings can last up to an hour and a half, 2 hours, and even then it seems like there's not really enough time, because it does get pretty detailed. So.
For, I think, what is it, $200, Emily? You can join the state legislative committee, and you'd be a call-in during the sessions. That way you keep track of what's going on every week.
Great, thank you, Sam. I really appreciate your giving a plug to State Affairs Committee, because that information is brought out. It's discussed in quite a bit of detail sometimes in the State Affairs Committee, and because not everyone is in Denver, imagine that. You're across the state, and there is the ability to call in and participate through a webinar process or through a telephone call-in. So that will give you some additional information as well if you're a member of State Affairs.
And just quickly, these documents right here, these are publicly available on the advocacy side of our webpage. And so these are certainly a benefit to our entire membership, but the benefit of State Affairs is being a part of the discussion and really, I mean, and if you can be in the room, that is just so much better, because seeing the body language of everyone and really hearing the meat of the discussion, that is invaluable. And so I'd say that's the benefit of really being on the committee.
One of the other things I would mention is we're very fortunate with our State Affairs Committee every Monday morning at 8 o'clock during the session, but we have a number of legislators, particularly from the Ag Committee, who generally participate. Representative Valdez is one of those. Representative Mitch Bush is another one who has been there regularly. And that's a tremendous a bit of help to hear their insight as to the legislation that they're working on and some of the reasons behind it. So those are some of the resources that we have tried to bring to bear to help you. But I would like to hear more about what you would like to find out about and how you would best like to see it communicated. As Emily said, we've got a number of ways of communicating through emails, through web-based information. We also have social media. Apparently, some people favor that more than others. But we'd like to know, is there a particular way of communicating specific information that you would advocate? Any takers on this one?
Can I add while they're thinking?
Please.
Last year there were like 613 bills introduced in 120 calendar days, and the workload is front-end loaded with the legislative session because of the calendar process in which you got to get through the first committees that those bills are assigned to. So there's a huge crush in the first 45 days of the legislative session. And I can tell you, because Diana and I do this on a daily basis, there is no bill that she and I cannot find an interest for the water community in. We're really good at that. We can create all sorts of spooks under the bed in which we can find ways to captivate your interest. But what really would help all of us and the State Affairs Committee is when you get something from Water Congress on legislation, please look at it and please respond. If there's something in there that you see, we may not have picked it up. It may be very, very important. And so that helps the leadership of the Water Congress prioritize the things that we put our resources and our efforts into, because as you know, you cannot be all things to all people all the time. So we have to pick and choose, and we want to pick and choose the things that you care about the very most. So Diana? Yeah.
So just really briefly, from the member survey that we most recently conducted about a month ago, we learned that our members would like more ongoing communication about legislation. And so, okay, and then we have 81% of our members who are very interested in receiving communications about Colorado legislation. So I guess our main question as staff is, what does ongoing mean to you?
So who would like to tackle that?
Yeah. How much is enough? How much is too much? We need to know that too. Do I have to call for a volunteer?
It's going to work like jury. We don't get a volunteer, we're going to sort of nominate someone.
And so, the weekly bill status sheet. Thank you. The weekly bill status sheet, that is ongoing, but it's not a summary. It's not text. It's not, but you do that. And so we're kind of wondering, what's the happy medium for ongoing? We learned that instead of just receiving an end result, you really want to hear, are you wanting to hear something every day? Are you wanting to hear something bi-weekly? And in what sort of detail do you want that? And I know this is a tough question to really think about on the spot. And like I said, this is not your last opportunity to provide input. So,
Yeah, one of the things I would tell you is that if you go to the bill summaries, in addition to the summary, there is a hyperlink to the actual text of the bill and the amendment, so that will be helpful as well.
Hi, thanks. One of the things, I do appreciate the bill summary, the text, but one of the things too would be helpful, and I don't know how simple this would be, but some way of identifying some of the positions that are expressed during the meeting, because especially if you're participating by conference call, you don't recognize, there's some voices you always recognize, but a lot of them you don't know who's saying it or who's taking a particular position one way or the other, and that would be helpful. So maybe just a little more detail in the notes to that extent.
And so that is one thing that I have struggled with in the past is how much to include. And I certainly want to represent what is said, but I also don't want to, maybe sometimes naming names isn't helpful and sometimes it is. So I really appreciate that, and we'll keep that in mind, because I've really gone back and forth on, do I say who said this, or is it a general?
Well, I think, at least if someone is making a motion in a second, I mean, that can be helpful there. I mean,
Oh, yeah, so we
that's
actually
kind of a
do
public record.
include.
I think the last year you have been doing
Yeah,
that, which is
yeah,
helpful,
yeah. Thank you.
No, I was just going to say for Emily to try to keep track of everybody's positions, I think sometimes could be difficult, because if somebody knows an amendment's coming on, they may change their position. And by the time she sends it out, she could be sending out old information. And I'd hate to have her get put in a position where she's saying people have a certain position when they no longer have it. So I don't know how you would handle that, but.
That has been an issue. Thank you for mentioning that. I want to make sure everything I'm reporting is correct, and also kosher with the people I'm reporting it about. So making sure I'm getting every word right. Making sure I'm getting every word right is sometimes difficult, but absolutely can try to do a better job there.
One of the real challenges for those of you who work in this area is the speed at which amendments can be introduced or even contemplated. So things can change very rapidly and positions change.
I don't follow stuff closely all the time. I really appreciate having it available to me on that all of the time basis. The things then that I grab an interest in, listening to that discussion, what motivated the issue, and identifying that in some manner, which ties to players and where they come from. That still helps me understand better as it's unfolding, to see whether I've got a real interest to try and get my input provided through the places that I do that. So in terms of those summaries, and if it's issue-oriented that includes out of date and whatever else, that still helps me as I see it to try then and put it into the present context as I direct guidance if I'm doing that on things. But I don't know whether that's useful to you or not.
So am I right in hearing that maybe more history and background of why this issue is being brought?
Yeah, that's a lot better summary than I gave you.
Yeah, so can you update this weekly after the committee meeting? Is that pretty much how that's done? And then post it on the webpage? Is that your process?
Yes, it depends kind of what the week is like. If it's a really, really busy week and there are a lot of changes, it might be midweek, but always before
the next week?
Yeah.
So my question then is, if there's an amendment or one of the bills changes substantively, it's to Diane's point earlier, then do you have an alert or something else that goes beyond just posting the update on the webpage to alert folks that may be particularly interested in whatever the change or amendment is?
Unfortunately, that's not the way it always happens, because I update the summaries and that on Friday. As you probably know, in some cases, the amendment actually takes a couple of days after it's been offered to come out in final form. So those summaries are updated with amendments on Fridays. primarily because that's the first time we have away from the legislature is Friday afternoon when those things can be done. That's put out then, it's posted to the website. When we've had working groups with things that change pretty quickly, or this last year on Senate Bill 40, the Open Records Bill, which was in a constant state of flux and meetings going on constantly, we did try to get information out as best we could on a real-time basis, but even at that, it was less than what we would have liked to do. But it's something, thank you for asking that, because it's something we might be able to talk about.
There's parties, if there was an amendment that came in and a party felt they were injured, we'll just use that word, one way or another, they might want to know real quick.
Good point.
Just for time purposes, we're sort of running down in our 30-minute allocation, so we've only got about 5 minutes left, and we want to cover as much as we possibly can there. Oh, good. There's no next slide. Okay, we're done.
Okay, so
But I would sort of tag on with what Diana and Emily have been saying. Emily works really, really hard to get information out early before the State Affairs Committee meets on Monday morning, so that we've had access to not just the agenda, but some of the key background pieces of information, the bills and stuff like that, so we can discuss it, and so we can have conversations with the legislators who show up. And that also is not secret information. It's not cloistered in some kind of folder that you can't get to. And it would be very, very helpful for any of you that belong to organizations, or if you belong to the State Affairs Committee, if you see something when you look at that, please flag it so we can make sure that somebody articulates it during the meeting, and we can have at least some discussion along those ways. So.
How about giving us a quick summary of the timeline? If the committee meets on, say, Monday morning, then how long do people like us have to get input into our representatives? I know that, Monday morning would presumably be too late, the following Monday morning, et cetera.
Well, Emily can correct me on this, but I think she tries to get the information out on Thursday before the meeting. By noon. Yeah. And by email, by text, by phone call, you can reach somebody on the State Affairs Committee or the staff pretty quickly, and they'll make a note to get it to the chairman to make sure that we do get that discussed.
And I think part of your question was, how long do you have to get to your own representatives? Is that correct, as in elected representatives? I would say if you have a relationship with your representative, keep it an ongoing conversation. Don't wait for a specific meeting date. If you have a concern, certainly express it to them. I would say it's nice if you tell us too, so that we understand what your concern is and where those issues are. But you need to also have that conversation. The committees, the legislative committees at the Capitol, take a bill through hearing. Then there's a process which it goes to floor debate and then final reading. That can take as much as 3 to 4 weeks to go through the process. It can take 2 to 3 days. So it varies.
Going back to Richard's question, Richard, how would you get your information about the bill from the committee?
That's why I was thinking in terms of timeline. If the information comes out on a Thursday, I might or might not get to it, see the email Thursday night or Friday. And then, in my case, if I'm trying to talk to the organization, then I have to talk to my organization as opposed to a personal view, if you will. And then whatever happens there, communicate that back to the legislature. So there's, I think, a time, and it takes time to do all that.
Absolutely.
I guess my experience has been, that is an issue for a lot of folks. They have to get back to their board. They have to get back to their membership before they can take a position before Monday morning. But on our side, too, a lot of what happens is that there are amendments to bills that come out Friday afternoon and are posted over the weekend. And sometimes we can't take a position because nobody's had time to look at the amendment. So it really depends on the bill for timeline. And it's unfortunate that we have 120 days. Either it's unfortunate or it's a blessing. I don't know. But I understand what you're saying.
I would also add to that, even if you don't think it's timely, communicate, because a bill can get laid over in a committee for a week or 2 weeks. As Emily and Diana have said, we could get an amendment before it goes to the floor, any number of things. And the staff or Diana will get back to you with some sort of feedback, even if it's, thanks for letting us know, but that was amended out of the bill in committee, because that lets you know. You don't have to continue to worry about whether or not it's floating around there loose. So my guidance would be, if you think about it, communicate it. And everybody will figure a way to use that information.
Maybe one thing I could add to that, I think it would be helpful, is I realize you can't really predict the schedule. It can be all over the place. But just understanding the process. And maybe, I like the webinars that you guys do. I think they're really good. You can do an hour-long webinar. So maybe at the beginning of the legislative session, it might be good to just kind of do the refresher course and maybe even have some legislators join in and just talk about, here's a process of how a bill gets introduced, goes through committee, goes to votes. Just so at least, I think that's all identified on the bill status sheet. You can see where it is today, and then it kind of at least gives you an idea, how much time do I have? If it's already at the end of the process, you got zero, but maybe still have some opportunities.
Absolutely. That's something that we can definitely do and would be pretty easy to pull together. So
Yeah. And thanks for bringing that up, because one of the things that we have done and why this is so much fun to talk about how the process works is that we have a couple of days each session when there's a pond group that comes to the Capitol and they do a tour of the Capitol. They sit in on a committee meeting. They go to the floor and observe debate. So they see that process play out. But that's something that we might want to do with the broader membership. I would be happy to do it because I think it's really important to see the whole process in action. Did we have one more comment or question?
One closing comment, one closing question? Please, Sam.
I can't overstate the importance of being a member of the federal and state legislative committees. I belong to both. And very often the legislators will actually appear in the meeting room at our headquarters and tell why they support the bill, why they want the bill passed. And if you're a member of that committee, you have the power to vote yes or no for the bill, against the bill, or to table it to get more information. But I think it's very important that our members belong to those two committees.
Thanks, Sam. And I will just make another observation. It is very, very common for a legislator who is working on a piece of legislation to come to the Water Congress and, after discussing it and hearing the feedback, to ask the Water Congress to put together a working committee of experts to help them shape the bill. As Representative Valdez knows, he dragged us out 3 meetings in a row at 7 a.m., 4 meetings on a Monday, and he will dearly pay the price for that for a number of years. But it's also, those are good. They may seem like they're busy work, but everybody learns an awful lot, and they're constructive, and sometimes those are not really adversarial, but sometimes they aren't issues that the Water Congress is comfortable with, and so we get a lot of things taken care of through that kind of a negotiational process, so we don't have a blow up at the legislature.
Thank you, Dick and Diana, and for everyone's participation. We're going to move on quickly to our next topic, financing. I know you're all so excited for it. And we have, Mike said it first. And we have Mike Brode and Kirk Russell here to join Dick. And I will get us started quickly. So from our member survey that we conducted recently, we learned that our members want to hear more about water project financing. And then I'll let you all take it from here. Do we have 2 mics? Oh, I didn't see you there. Here you are.
2 will do. Here, Kurt.
You want me to sing? Yeah.
And I will ask, I think through our recording this, and I think you're skipping kind of, yeah. So one question that we want to answer is,
what's going on and where? And if you were in the session this morning, we talked about financing, and there was a mention of this one. Now we're cooking with gas. There are a few groups, at least one that I'm a part of, that is working on water project financing options. As many of you probably know, there was a group that met to help put together that section that discussed financing and the water plan. And that group has met a few times since that's been completed, and I think we're going to try to keep that group moving forward. Sort of the purpose now is to find ways to implement the ideas that were discussed in the water plan. I think we're all about implementation now. You've probably heard that many times. And we want to continue that dialogue, that discussion about what opportunities do we have for new revenue sources to help fund water projects, that sort of thing. And one of the questions that we have is, if we bring you a narrow set of options, like 5 or 10, is that something that you think the Water Congress would want to hear about and help shape what goes further, whether it goes to the legislature or whether it goes to a ballot question for the citizens to decide? Is that something the Water Congress membership would like to be a part of? I'm a member, so I can speak as a member of the Water Congress. I think we would want to have a say in that, because we're all going to have diverse opinions about what's the best sort of revenue stream that we might choose, whether that be a container fee or some other type of fee. I think we all want input on that. And if it's something that you guys are really interested in staying on top of as we move forward to try to identify that, and I see John Stolps in the room. I know John would like for us to continue working very hard on implementation of the plan. So if that is something that you guys, the membership, would want to be involved with, please let us know, let staff, the Water Congress know. Kirk, do you have anything to add to that?
No, but I guess you could unpack this and go a lot of different directions, and so I'm going to throw this question out to the audience here. In the process of this survey, who would have answered the question that they want to know more about financing options? Well, and maybe if you do raise your hand, be ready for me to ask, what would you want to know more about? Is it you have a project in mind and you're in the research process and you need a route to get there? And that's why when this came up in the conversation, I was kind of curious, what really is the audience of Water Congress looking for? And we all try hard to get out in front of the questions, whether it be through conferences. So I guess my question to the audience here is, who was looking for more information, and what kind of information do you look for? My gut feeling is you want to know where the grant money is. That's probably
always. Well, and I have the list of questions as a result of the survey, so I know you're out there somewhere wanting to know more about financing and how do we finance projects. So, some of the questions: how are projects currently getting financed? How do we solve the projected shortfall? Those sorts of things.
So, Mark, go ahead.
Yeah. Oh, here.
You need a mic?
Here.
No, I have one. Oh, he doesn't
I'm
have
taking one to Mark. He raised his
Really
hand.
quickly, the first question is, can you raise your hand if you took the survey? Okay. Thank you.
Well, just based on my experience of what people have asked, I think if we had in one place, on Water Congress webpage or wherever, a list of all the potential financing options that are available especially to smaller communities or special districts and things like that. And by that, I mean, what's available from Water and Power Development Authority, what's available from CWCB, what's available from the roundtable process, what's available from the SRF program, from WIFIA, all the federal sources, what watershed grant opportunities are out there. I mean, that's generally what people are searching for. And bigger entities actually that have financing people sometimes, you'll see an email saying, am I missing some grant opportunities? Where are they? So just some sort of a comprehensive listing. And then contact information that goes maybe with each one.
Yeah, that was a great question.
Yeah, and then I guess the follow-up to that, is Water Congress the place to search for that? And maybe that's, I think that was kind of part of our mission. Is that what Water Congress should be focused on, providing that? I think that's a pretty easy solution to get in one place to look for that kind of stuff.
But I think it also goes beyond just what are the existing sources. It's an exploration of other possibilities, and where should that where should that be driven? Is it again through the legislature? Is it through ballot questions? I mean, we've tried to search for different, because the water plan identifies $3 billion shortfall. I mean, it identifies $20 billion of projects. The state says in the plan we're going to pick up or try to pick up $3 billion of that. Now, remember, that's just water supply. That's not treatment. I've got another between $12 and $13 billion to throw on top of that for drinking water treatment and wastewater treatment. And so, but I think what we're trying to elicit here is there a role for the Water Congress to be involved in a decision about how to raise that revenue? Because let's face it, if somebody goes to the ballot with a container fee and the Water Congress may not be on board with that, if that's, then that's a hard road to hoe. And so I guess we're looking for the levels of input that the membership would like to have and direct as to where that goes. So, no? Other questions? Here you go.
A number of you in the room participated in the Colorado Water Plan. And I remember when we first started the water plan, we looked at other states' model on how to do a water plan. And I think maybe this is just a suggestion here, looking at other models that you're familiar with, Mike. And the question is Colorado politically ready to fund water projects, either through a fee or a tax, and so maybe the role of the Water Congress is to share information about other models, financing models. California certainly has one. Texas has one. And it's really given us the information about what the possibilities are to gather the general acceptance about, is the climate ready for the state of Colorado to finance projects? And everybody's got an opinion about that, but I think that's what we did with the water plan. We looked at other models before the water plan framework was done, and we kind of took a little bit from some of our neighbors to make the plan successful.
And I think that's where I see a role for the Water Congress, is to be the pulse of, is this a good idea or is this a bad idea? What do you, I mean, you guys are all over the state. What would you see your locale? Would they support this? Would they oppose this? I mean, I think that's where there's some value to bringing a big issue. Texas was lucky; they had a rainy day fund and they got $2 billion. That's not going to appear here, I don't think, unless you got a John. You got a genie somewhere that. Certainly, that occurred. So.
They didn't ask.
Other questions?
Travis, I think you're absolutely right on that. I would also suggest that a close collaboration between the Water Congress leadership and the CWCB on those items and issues would be very, very fruitful and very, very useful. Because no matter what, we're going to need the mechanisms of the CWCB to help with the allocation and the prioritization. If for some reason you get $100 million a year in new money, trying to figure out where the best place is to commit those resources. I think you definitely want the community of the water users and also the Water Conservation Board working hand in glove to guide that.
I just wanted to add to that we've had some of this discussion at the Interbasin Compact Committee meetings in the past, and basically the consensus was that they didn't know what the best source of the revenue was, but they wanted to be in on the spending part of it. Yeah, imagine that. But as we go back to referendum A and some other ballot initiatives we've had in this state, we have to have a pretty decent plan, fairly short, simple, articulate, in order to convince voters, if it is a type of ballot initiative, to know what they're voting on. And so the plan to how to spend the money or invest the money is every bit as critical as the source that it might come from. And so I don't think we can get off the hook that easy of saying, well, I don't care, you just figure out where to get it and I'll tell you how to spend it. We can't do that. We have to take both sides of that equation.
Other questions? Come on, folks.
So we do have time, we have about 10 to 15 minutes. We could let you out early. Any other thoughts on CWC's role in financing, the way that you would like the information to be communicated once we do have a specific role? Oh, come on. Come on.
Yeah.
Right, anyone who raises their hand with a question.
Kirk buys them a drink.
Kirk buys them a drink.
Yes. And just as an aside, I mean, think about this. We've talked about sources in the future, and I think we all recognize that federal sources are going to be drying up. I think that's a hard reality to face, and so it's going to be more incumbent upon ourselves to find those sources of revenue to fund these projects. So, you know, let's hope that our friends at Northern get permits so we can build some more storage. But Bureau of Reclamation and big water projects, I'm not sure there's much out there, and everybody's shaking their head no. So we're going to have to take care of ourselves more, I think, going forward.
So how can we increase more storage in the state of Colorado?
Make it easier to permit. There should be a round of applause for that one. Come on, folks. Hey, I'm a finance guy, but I understand that you got to have a permit to build it in the first place. So I think that's a big chunk of the answer is it takes a long time for these projects to get permitted. And it's not that we don't want to take care of the environment or go through the process and allow people to have their say. But it is a place where it gets gummed up and it gets delayed. And people don't want to undertake big projects because of that process. And Eric, I'm sure, could talk to you all day about that. And then some. So permitting is a big spot. And like I said, if you do have a project, you should have financed it yesterday because rates don't get much cheaper than they are now. So, but moving quickly in that space, in the permitting space, is, as Steve Harris once put it, he always talks about water time. It exceeds glacial time. So, other questions? So he got a drink.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
A connection. He is your connection for the first cocktail.
Representative Valdez, do you have, was that a loaded question? Do you have ideas that could help change the answer to that?
Well, and it's going back to the communities. Do we need more water storage in the state of Colorado? Yes.
Not rhetorical.
Absolutely. And that's something, you know, talking with Mike here, it says permitting. And we need to look at that more in the state, and I agree. It's if we can increase more storage for our communities, for our agriculture aspect, for our watersheds. Look at this year. It's one of the wettest years that we've had in a long time. Look at the amount of water that we could be storing for not only our communities, but other states.
Don't mention that.
So I'll be working on this, and yes, there are some ideas, but we need to come to the table and keep bouncing these ideas all throughout the state, not just one water basin, because, well, and each water basin is unique too. So that's another aspect we need to look at, and how can we increase that storage. So also, getting back to Richard's idea, if you would need to get contact with me, my email is donald.valdez.house@state.co.us. So that's a good way to get a hold of me prior to that bill being voted on or headed to committee. So please.
I'm nursing a sore back, and I apologize for not standing up, but I'm reminded of the comment that was made by the presentation this morning by Thornton on their pipeline. And I think Mark Colbert told us that they're looking at 600 permits and licenses, and they are avoiding waters of the U.S. by tunneling and some things like that. And if memory serves me correct, when Colorado Springs, didn't you have 147 or something like that for SDS, and you avoided all the as much federal permitting as you needed? And so, yeah. Okay, but they still had hundreds of permits, and so sometimes we're our own worst enemy on some of this, because of the Thornton project, where a lot of right-of-ways for utilities and roads and what have you. But some of them were licenses. I don't know what the difference between a license and a permit is, but anyway, it's something you have to have somebody to sign before you can go ahead with the project. So I don't know whether there's some, and as a former county commissioner, whenever something comes through, the county's looked at it as a revenue source. And so you're damned if you do and damned if you don't.
One of the things that I see on projects that come into CWCB, and most of the work that we're doing is maintaining existing systems, upgrading and returning them to a useful function for another 50, 100 years. It seems to me that there would be a significant risk associated with starting a project, and elected officials, I would think, would have trouble putting out the kind of money such as Northern, if you would have known, Eric, from the beginning how much it would cost to get to this point and still not have water stored somewhere. I think that risk is so great sometimes that we're no longer saying yes, we're saying, nah, probably not. And I think it's very difficult. I've often wondered, is the state's resources, whether they be financial, is that a place where we could start pushing some things, making offers to grant, to get things started? Because I think there's just too much risk associated with taxpayer money locally, and the resources are so thin as it is. I don't think projects are getting started. The permit risk is too great to take that leap of faith to think you're going to finish with water. So anyway, I know you guys know that, but we see it day in and day out.
A really naive question here. Does the Water Congress see its role as initiating legislation? Is it policy discussion, or is it providing feedback to legislative proposals that are coming from outside of Water Congress? I mean, that would help me to understand what the Water Congress's role would be with respect to financing. And I want to drink, so I wanted to ask that question.
I better check.
You know what?
I'll let you take this.
I got a bag full of money in my room. That's what everybody thinks.
I think the answer to your question is, what is our role? Is it initiating legislation, or is it responding? Typically, we respond to legislation. I think if we were to initiate something, it would have to come from the membership through our board. And it would, consistent with our bylaws and everything else, but it would be initiated through the membership and the board.
Well, I have a question. Don Quorum said a while back that the last permitting took only 16 years from the time the permit process started until they were able to actually start doing anything. So financing yesterday doesn't really work if it's not going to happen for 16 years. But would it be the place of the Water Congress to not necessarily initiate legislation, but to document what has to be done, how long it takes, and present that to the legislature and say, gee, isn't there some kind of solution, at least at the state level, even if we can't control the feds?
Yeah, the permitting process, I mean, it was identified in the water plan now. A lien event. And so I assume there's some feedback coming from that that will drive what needs to be changed in the legislature or just process within the state agencies. You know what, Lauren, why don't you talk about that lien process?
So the CWCB, one of the recommendations in the water plan was to do a lien event on permitting. So we gathered with our federal partners in the EPA and water providers and some advocacy groups and held a lien event, which is really an efficiency event. I guess that's how you would describe it, yeah? I'm looking at the people who are involved here. And out of that process, we put together, CWCB and the group that was involved, put together a handbook that did just what you're suggesting. It sort of documents all the processes involved in going through a permitting process, the boxes that have to be checked. There aren't recommendations for legislation out of that because kind of the framework of the lien event, the sideboards were, you had to make efficiency improvements within existing laws. So we didn't kind of go there, but there is a handbook that's sort of best practices and kind of a guide for someone who's going through the process.
So we have 3 minutes.
So
5 minutes, 5 minutes.
5 minutes? So another question or two, or thought, comment? Poor Eric's been picked on, so.
Just a thought in regard to state financing and state role in the development of new projects. Under 122.2, which is the Fish and Wildlife Mitigation Plan that has to be approved by Colorado Parks and Wildlife Commission and Colorado Water Conservation Board, there's a provision in there that because of state funding hasn't ever been funded. And if I recall it correctly, it's the first 5% of mitigation is paid for by obviously the project proponent. The next 5% is to be paid for by the state of Colorado. And then any remaining, if there is any, is to be negotiated probably by the project proponent. It's never happened that way, I think for obvious reasons. The other thing that I'd just like to say on permitting is a lot of the controversy around a project is the effects of the project on the environment and on other water users. And obviously the 122.2, the Fish and Wildlife Mitigation Enhancement Plan, tries to address that from the state point of view. But I'd just throw out an idea that I think the state's missing the boat a little bit. The state, not the state of Colorado, the state water community may be missing the boat by not advocating maybe some public funding toward addressing in a more complete and a more robust way some of the impacts on the environment, let's say, by a project. Instead of looking at it as strictly mitigation, are there enhancements that can be done? I think the I'll say success, if you want to call 14 years of permitting a success, but we do have a permit, was that enhancement aspect. And a lot of times that's what pushes a project over the line for public acceptance is the I'll call it enhancements to address past sins, because there's been impacts. Boy, am I on a soapbox? This is terrible. Yeah, there's been impacts by actions in the past when development of water was considered a different type of thing, and environment wasn't considered. Well, when a new project comes around, a lot of times there's an attempt to address what is called past sins, what we call past sins at Northern, on the environment. And it isn't that project's fault, but it's an opportunity to move forward. Some enhancements that address those past effects. If the state of Colorado water community and the state as a whole could maybe step up and address some of that. So it seems like with our projects, the tipping point was, are we better with the project and without the project? And once that answer became yes, then things got a little bit easier, if you can call this easy. But is there a way that financing through the state, through some kind of a fee or whatever comes out of this, can be used in partnership with a mitigation plan, so you have an enhancement plan to address concerns in a more robust way? Because as you're going down the road, you get economies of scale with the project. You can add things to a project much cheaper than you can do them by themselves. So if you add an enhancement, say a conservation pool in a reservoir, to where you capture a little bit more water and can release it to improve stream, that isn't having to be paid for by the project proponent, you might have a better chance of success in moving some of these projects forward in a more timely manner. Because it does come into a controversial, you're goring my ox, or whatever word you want to use, or you're tipping the scales, or you're at the break point, whatever term you want to use out there. If you could overcome that by doing things that are complementary, I think that's a place that public financing may play a role. Project proponents are always obligated for the mitigation of the impacts, but enhancements are something that the public benefits from as a whole, and maybe the public ought to be thinking about paying some of that load.
Let me ask
Enough soapbox.
Eric, in your project, as an example, do you have an idea of a percent of the cost of your project that could be contributed to the enhancement side?
If it's a project proponent, the answer to that is as little as possible.
Well, in your case, in Windy Gap.
We're probably, depending upon you see, the big thing about mitigation or enhancement is, what price do you put on water? For example, part of the puzzle to Windy Gap firming was the 5412.5 that we are releasing from Granby out of Granby for the endangered fish. Well, all the East Slope Transbasin diverters contributed to that, but that was a complementary thing to what we were doing as well. We provided space in Granby for up to 7,500 acre feet of storage by Middle Park or Grand County. What's the value of that? What's the value of the value of the 5412.5 was $19 million, because that's what the East Slope had to pay to get that down there. That was probably synergy to help what was going on. For example, on NISP, we're going to put 14,000 acre feet of water down the Pooter when we get our permit. Not if, when we get our permit. What's the value of 14,000 acre feet of water at prime times when the species need it? Many, many millions of dollars, depending on how you price it. Project opponents say that's part of the project. You don't get credit for that. All that aside, people say if you're in for less than or around 10%, that's what you need to shoot at. And that was one of the comments we got on the Fish and Wildlife Mitigation Enhancement Plan for NISP, is we weren't quite up to, I think they were using a 15% threshold, don't quote me on those numbers. And they just said, we need to contribute more money because we weren't up to that threshold. Not because of a specific impact, it just, we weren't up to that threshold. So, you know, I think on most projects, you're going to have between 8 and 15%, just to try to answer your question.
I think we're out of time. Oh, I owe Eric a lot more than 5 drinks.
Thank you so much to everyone for participating, and especially to our speakers. We're going to take about a 12-minute break, and then be right back in here at 3:15, and we'll get started with our second theater session of the afternoon. And then we get to go up on the mountain